And so I find that fascinating, that you need the New Testament in one hand and with the treaty in the other to interpret it correctly. Do you find that's actually happening within kind of contemporary political discourse?
We're going off.
Because some people, they say, no, this is like the first treaty. This is actually supersedes the Treaty of Waitangi.
Yeah, I think there's a narrative that's emerged, and I think it's in more recent years, but I could be wrong.
Kia ora koutou. Today on Lunch on the Way, we're joined by New Zealand historian and Treaty of Waitangi scholar, Dr. Sam Carpenter. I first met Sam when he started working at Laidlaw College as the New Zealand history lecturer. He leads Te Rongopai ki Aotearoa Project at Laidlaw College, which looks at exploring the multidimensional relationship between Christianity and Maori society. One of the most interesting things about Sam is he used to work as a treaty scholar for the Waitangi Tribunals in Wellington, and he gets more into that in this conversation. He has often contributed his historically informed opinion when it comes to political discourses in New Zealand for organizations like New Zealand Herald and other online media platforms, and also traditional media platforms as well. In this conversation, we dive really deep into the Christian origins of the Treaty of Waitangi, its origins and historical context, and why we need to interpret it faithfully within that context. And also, Sam provides a reason why we need to have more nuanced conversations around the Treaty of Waitangi in 2025 and beyond. Now for our conversation with Dr. Sam Carpenter. So you've worked as a lawyer prior to working here at Laidlaw, and you worked with the Waitangi Tribunals as a scholar and lawyer within that work. So what is that work? What did your work look like, and what period of time was that, roughly?
Yeah, kia ora, Joey. So I came on staff here at Laidlaw beginning of 2022, and prior to that, for about a decade, I worked down in Wellington. So we were based in Wellington. And I worked primarily as an historian, actually, so I did have a law background for a few years leading up to that. But I worked as an historical research analyst and inquiry facilitator initially for the Waitangi Tribunal. So in-house for the tribunal, assisting historic claims inquiries, kind of behind the scenes, you know. So I did that just for a year, actually, and then I moved on and I worked in treaty settlements. Which is the government's office that negotiates the actual settlements. So as I say, treaty settlements look like a number of things depending on where you're looking. So the tribunal will hear the claims often, and they'll issue a large and long report about them. Then the government comes along through the office of treaty settlements and negotiates the claims directly with iwi. So I was part of that process too as an historian on one of the negotiation teams. So what that looked like for me as an historian was actually negotiating an historical account by committee or by small committee. So we had to negotiate what happened.
Getting back to the kind of the facts of what we know.
What we know, and basically built on archival sources, like publicly available sources for the most part, but agreeing with the iwi negotiators, you know, what happened, and essentially focused on issues where iwi hapu were detrimentally affected by the Crown. And then that historical account goes into the treaty settlement deed of settlement, and with all the other redress that's described, like commercial redress, cultural redress, obviously the financial settlement packages in there as part of that. So that apology redress, though, is the historical account is the foundation of the Crown making apologies to iwi. Where the minister will actually get up and actually read an apology, which can often be quite a moving thing. So I worked on that apology redress side, or the historical account side, which was a lot of fun. I also got to, it was challenging, but it was also fun. Not all the time, but essentially I got to sit on negotiation meetings as well, like generally with the next team. So they'd be negotiating like the financial quantum of the settlement, which was obviously quite a big issue. But only one of several, actually, because it's what other cultural redress they were getting. You know, co-management of, say, significant historical sites with local councils and things like that. So all of those things go into a settlement. It's quite a complex process.
So what was, if you had to think back a little bit, what would be one highlight or like a significant moment that you were a part of during that time? I know there are probably a few, but if you had to think of, like this was like kind of the pinnacle or a really big moment that I was a part of.
Well, I think it was probably actually concluding one of the iwi settlements. I think I can probably name it, the Rangitane settlement. So I actually wrote much of that historical account, and my wife and I got to go to the deed signing ceremony, which was held locally, hosted by the iwi in Waitangi. So that was pretty awesome. Just a sense of celebration, in a sense, like quite a sort of a joyous moment of, oh, we've actually finally settled this thing that we've been carrying for so long. Yeah. And it was just awesome to be part of. There was a great feed, great feast, which went along with that.
Yeah.
Icing on the cake.
Yeah. And so a lot of your work involved a lot of reading, a lot of archival investigating to support maybe the lawyers or the legal claims to actually build a case together, or to
Yeah. I mean, it's focused on in some ways they're strange histories because they're focusing just on the negative or detrimental parts of the history.
Yeah.
So in some ways you could argue that they don't tell the full story.
Yeah.
But what they're really trying to do, the historical account, is provide a basis for the Crown Apology and a kind of a historical basis for the settlement as a whole.
Yeah.
Because obviously you need to be settling something. There needs to be some claim that's legitimate or justified.
Yeah.
So that's what the historical account is there to do, to justify the settlement in a sense. So it was a significant process to be a part of.
So now you're a historian of, I guess, Christian history of New Zealand, roughly speaking, here at Laidlaw, and with some treaty issues as well sprinkled in there. I want to go back to the kind of the beginnings of Christian missionary introduction into Aotearoa and kind of painting the landscape, because I do want to eventually get to a conversation about the Treaty of Waitangi, what that is. We've obviously, the tribunal is a huge piece where there's a bunch of context to fill out as to what that actually is. But first, I want to get back to kind of the very beginning, okay? If that's okay.
Yes.
As a historian, can we get back to the...
Well, it makes sense to start at the beginning.
Well, yeah.
I mean, and historians like to start at the beginning.
Yeah, how far back? Like a million years or something, geologically speaking? No, we're going to get back to, the late 1700s, early 1800s? Yeah. So what was the spiritual landscape prior to Christian missionaries arriving in Aotearoa?
Yeah, sure. Well, in simple terms, and because I don't regard myself as an expert, particularly on, I guess, the depth and the breadth of what that landscape was, but I mean, generally you could describe it as the spiritual and the physical world. Yeah, there wasn't much separation. The physical world, as we'd say it in Western terms, was animated by spirits or gods, like a lot of parts of the world, right? Yeah. And human beings were descended from the gods as well, if you go back far enough in the genealogies of the whakapapa. Especially chiefs had high-ranking people were certainly understood to descend from gods. There's a debate in the New Zealand literature over whether there was a supreme being in Māori cosmology. Okay. And there does seem to be some evidence that at least some iwi, some tribes had an account of a supreme being. But in other places maybe it's more muted. It's not so obvious necessarily in 19th century missionary records, for example. Mm-hmm. And, discussions about a supreme being. I suppose they were coming and saying, well, Jehovah is God anyway, and His Son is Jesus Christ, etc. So, so that's the general landscape. Another part of it is that the authority, as in many cultures, is mediated through, I guess, religious or spiritual concepts and institutions. So the constitution, the institution or concepts of tapu, the sacred. That's to put it simply, and mana and utu, all of these things sort of undergird the authority of chiefs and kind of structure the way society operates. Yeah. So if somebody of rank who's descended from the gods, if they are insulted or injured in any way, or certainly if they are killed, then that requires an accounting, let's say. And so that's where the Utu complex comes in.
Is it like retribution?
Retribution,
Yeah, okay.
or at least a rebalancing of the score.
Yeah.
I mean, you could describe it in simple terms as, you know, the Jewish sort of an eye for an eye. But
Yeah.
I think there's a lot sort of a deeper kind of account of it in terms of that kind of sacred system.
Is it like there's a sacred balancing scale?
Yeah,
And if
sacred
something's
balancing
out of
scale.
balance, it needs to be brought back in.
It needs to be brought back.
Okay.
Yes, and so if somebody of rank dies or is killed, then that requires a rebalancing.
Okay.
But Utu also has a positive, the way we might see it, and that it's also about the way you host. And if you host and put on an amazing feast for your guests, then you expect that when you go to their place, they'll also reciprocate. So that kind of reciprocity.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
And honestly, what I find fascinating is a lot of indigenous spirituality and this integration of material and spiritual realities.
Yeah.
It doesn't. That's a pre-modern world in Europe. You know, it's not too dissimilar
exactly.
to that. Like a great chain of being of like God, king, priest. You know, all the way
That kind of
down.
enchanted world, right?
An enchanted world of there's not a flatness to it. It's everything's dynamic. Everything's kind of happening, and what happens with our relationship here happens in the like spiritually. It's a spiritual thing.
Well, I mean, I was just reading last night about Aristotelian ideas that fit into, you know, the sort of Middle Ages ideas of transubstantiation.
Yeah.
So that's kind of an example or expression of that, you know.
Yeah.
That the bread and the wine become the body and blood of Christ.
Yeah.
You know, we can't get our heads around that as moderns.
No.
But they could.
Had no problem with it.
They had no
like,
problem with it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. It's only like a post-enlightenment kind of issue.
Yeah,
Even
yeah.
the reformers, they didn't mind it too much.
No.
It only took a century or so after that for things to shift. I think. You're a
Yes.
historian.
Yeah.
So that's broadly speaking, kind of the spiritual landscape. And so what I'm really curious about is who first came to who was the first Christian missionary who kind of showed up, or group who showed up, and what was that reception like of the Christian faith?
Yeah.
And because correct me if I'm wrong, I know there's two phases of that story, or more, but at least two distinct ones. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is it, you know, people came late 1700s and then left and then didn't come back again for a little bit longer and then found out there were Christians already here? Or is that a folk theory?
Not quite.
Okay, there we
There's
go.
certainly different phases.
Okay, there we
There's
go.
certainly different phases, but I mean, the simple story is it all begins in relationships, as these things usually do.
Yeah.
Between, in particular, Samuel Marsden, Reverend Samuel Marsden, who's the chaplain of the penal colony, the convict settlement in New South Wales, in Australia. He meets these rangatira, these chiefs who are visiting, as you do, you get on various ships, including European ships. So whalers and sealers get to New Zealand, basically in the wake of Captain Cook, which is, you know, 17, late 1760s, 1770s.
Oh, okay.
So then whalers and sealers turn up. Māori jump on these ships, and then eventually they own vessels themselves that go across the Tasman Sea and turn up in New South Wales and the settlements there. So Parramatta and Sydney and so on. And so Marsden, who's the Anglican chaplain at the convict settlement, he meets these chiefs.
Yeah.
And so really it develops from those relationships. And there's a key moment in time that you might say is a turning point where Marsden's he's actually coming back from London to New South Wales, and there's a chief of rank on board. He finds him on board. He's very sick. He was mistreated, abused aboard a whaler, and got himself to London, but in a very poor condition. So Marsden nurses him back to health on this return voyage, and he stays with Marsden in Sydney for a while, and then through this chief, Ruatara, that's Marsden's doorway to establish the first mission station in 1814.
So he helped him out.
He helped him out. Very much so, and he gets introduced, obviously, to Christianity. I think Marston actually already met him a few years before, this chief, and he bumps into him again in these rather troubling circumstances. So through that chief, anyway, who's from the Northern Bay of Islands, Marsden, who by this time has got CMS, or Church Missionary Society, approval to start a mission in New Zealand.
Yeah.
That's why he was in London, actually. That's that's one of the reasons he was there. We went back. He comes across a few years later, actually 5 years later, in 1814, and famously preaches the first sermon on New Zealand soil. The first service is held.
That's in the Bay of Islands?
In the Bay of Islands, Northern Bay of Islands, with Ruatara, sort of the presiding rangatira, and other chiefs there. And, the response to that first sermon, he preaches from Luke 2, "Behold, I bring you glad tidings of great joy, which shall be for all people." And interestingly, an interesting bit of New Zealand ecclesiology or whatever, there's a haka in response to that first sermon.
Oh, okay.
Which described in interesting ways as a dance of joy, and in Ngāpuhi tradition it's described as a hari, or a dance of joy.
Oh, okay.
So that's an interesting moment in time when this thing kicks off. Yeah.
Okay, so then what happens from there? Kind of, what's the engagement then? Do more missionaries come over, or?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so just give you the outline, the short story, because obviously we haven't got all day to get into this. But essentially, there's that first settlement of a few missionaries. The mission struggles for a few years. There's very few converts, as we'd understand them. And so it's not until Henry and Miriam Williams turn up in 1823, so about a decade later, he basically provides new leadership impetus for the mission, focuses on translation of the scriptures. And then within a few years of that, his brother turns up as well, William Williams, who's a Oxford BA graduate, Oxford graduate. And so he does a lot of the translation work. Anyway, they produce the New Testament by the late 1830s. And in that sort of 1830s period, the response to the gospel really starts to take off.
Okay.
There's a lot of baptism, a lot of worshipping communities spring up, often quite spontaneously, without European missionary input, right? They just spring up. Māori, one historian calls it the church rush. They just started building churches because that's what you do, right? In kind of native style, indigenous style. And so that's really starts to take off in the 1830s. So that by the 1840s, or by the mid 1850s anyway, there's estimates that between 60 to 90% at the high end of the Māori population is meeting regularly for Christian worship.
Is this just in the North Island, or is this south as
just
well?
the nationwide sort of estimate of what percentage of Māori are meeting regularly for some form of Christian worship, whether it's Anglican-based, Wesleyan, because the Wesleyans are next on the scene after Anglicans. So it goes Anglicans, CMS, Wesleyans turn up a few years after them, and then the Catholics turn up quite a bit later, like just before the treaty, 1838.
Oh, okay.
But they go on to have obviously some influence in some parts of the country. So that, anyway, by the 1850s, those are the three main missions. There's a very high percentage of Māori that respond to the gospel in some way, so it's really quite a remarkable story of response to the gospel in what we're talking a few decades, really. Like a whole people group has become, at least by some outward measure, Christian. And of course, there's similar things happen in the islands, and places like Tahiti and so on.
So, have sociologists looked into why? Because obviously we can say, well, it's God, the Holy Spirit, drawing people to Himself. Yes. But what was kind of like the ground fertile for this to happen? Like, were there things happening?
Okay. So what you're pointing to is a big debate in New Zealand historiography over why the Māori conversion, or even what was the Māori conversion. Because obviously you can measure it in a number of ways. Number of Western communities, baptisms, which is a much lesser number. Partly because Anglicans are very careful about who they baptise. They have to be catechised first. They have to show that they're serious about it.
And if you're catechized, it means you can read, I'm assuming?
You're literate in some fashion, probably, as well. So how do you measure it is a thing, but certainly what causes the response is debated. Obviously, from one end of the scale is the sort of spiritual kind of reasons. Oh well, God moved and the Spirit moved and people responded, and I mean I believe that, of course. Yeah. Coming from a Christian point of view, at a more sort of materialist end, like sort of secular end, there's things like basically depopulation and suffering through warfare, because the musket wars are kicked off at around the same time. So the gospel basically comes into this very fluid environment where these musket wars, as they're called in the histories, have kicked off big time. So
and what are the musket wars?
So essentially, one chief in particular, Hongi Hika, but other chiefs in the north get muskets. They then conduct significant raids to the south and exact utu, what we started with at the beginning of the conversation, for things that happened in the past to rebalance the score. And then they also bring back slaves as well, or prisoners of war, if you like, who do often menial tasks. So they'll work in the fields or they'll prepare food and things like this. And they could be quite high-ranking people as well. So it's not an insignificant thing. Yeah. And there's obviously death. So there's a lot of deaths. There's a lot of migration. Some tribes escape hot zones, like they actually migrate to different parts of the country. So you might say that suffering is a context for the response to the gospel. And I guess we can understand that.
Yeah, I get that.
As well. I mean, historians use this term fatal impact, which I think is a bit too strong, which is also kind of trying to say that the Māori gods, the old gods, weren't working anymore, and also there was this new world that was coming in that was powerful. You know, it had military technology, it had material wealth seemingly as well, and so in a Māori sense, like how do you explain that? Well, you explain it in spiritual terms. You know, well, these gods or this god must be powerful if these people are rich and wealthy, then there must be a spiritual aspect to that. So there's actually the real McCoy Māori explanation, which our colleague here, Brad, has explored recently in various writings. There's the scriptures. The fact that the scriptures are translated. I mean, let's just reel off the other things that are going on. Yeah. So the scriptures translated, printed like in large volumes, the prayer book and the New Testament in the 1830s, and then the Old Testament into the 1840s and 50s. So the entire Bible was translated by the mid 1850s,
which is pretty rapid. Like that's pretty quick.
Yeah, it's a pretty impressive translation,
considering there wasn't a written language prior to missionaries coming.
Yeah, so they had to work out the orthography for how to represent Māori. Yeah, you know, as with a lot of most Pacific languages, and a lot of languages, right? Yeah, yeah. And this is one of my props.
Hey, hold up to that middle camera.
A dictionary of the Māori language. So that was William Williams, so Henry Williams' brother. This is the 6th edition, and it's got this beautiful, I actually really love this cover. Yeah. This is the 1957 6th edition of the dictionary. First printing of the 6th edition, 1957. But that dictionary goes back to the 1840s, and I guess was, as with a lot of these scenarios, it's missionaries who are doing the translations, so what do? They compile a dictionary as well to try and figure out, what do all these words mean, and they compile word lists, and that becomes a dictionary over time. So this really is the result of missionary scholarship in the language, and it has been until very recent times like the authoritative Māori dictionary. It's kind of been not overtaken, but it now sits alongside a couple of sort of Māori only dictionary versions and so on. Oh, okay. And an online dictionary that's also very good, Te Aka. But anyway, so there's translation, getting back to the question. Yeah, no, you're good. There's translation of scripture, there's printing, and so Māori take to literacy as well, and reading, and that's like a craze as well. So there's the church rush, there's all of these things, there's musket wars, there's suffering, there's the power of the ideas, I think, ultimately. Yeah. appeal to Māori. Brad's explored that. The idea of genealogy and whakapapa in the New Testament, even the idea that Christ is a human whakapapa. Well, that's important to a Māori person who's thinking through the old cosmological lenses, that we actually descend from the gods. Well, this human actually descends from, he is God, but he's got a whakapapa that goes right back to Adam.
Yeah.
All of these things, I think, they all add up over time.
Well, it makes sense that when the scriptures were translated, that was like kind of a big catalyst for Christianity.
It's certainly a big part of it, I think.
Because whenever I go through periods of reading scripture a lot, and then for some reason not, and then when I go back to it, I'm like, oh, why was I not reading the scriptures as consistently this past month as I haven't I used to been?
Yes.
And because it's just like there's life in them, and when I imagine what could happen, this is obviously a little bit fictional, but someone who actually can read it is like, this is amazing, and then it inspires people to read it as well, and then it kind of spreads like that.
Yeah.
So you kind of spanned a little bit from 1814 to like 1850.
Yes.
So let's just get to the treaty for a little bit, the Treaty of Waitangi. What kind of caused that document to first pop up? Because it's considered the founding kind of document of the country. And from what I understand, there's Christian missionaries who played a significant role in its creation.
That's true. I just wondered, I think there's probably another significant thing I should say about the early Christianity.
All right, keep going.
And that is, before we get on to the treaty, because I think essentially the involvement of missionaries is very significant, and relationships they have with Māori are very significant backdrop to the treaty. But another thing about early Christianity is it soon becomes a Māori thing. In terms of who's spreading the word, it's a lot of that is done by Māori themselves. They may be doing it sort of more formally as sort of native teachers, they were called, or catechists or readers, sort of in an Anglican setting. People will understand what that means. So they were basically approved and authorised to go out and do these various things. But also a lot of it was spontaneous as well. So the slaves that I talked about in the Muscat Wars that are taken from southern tribes up to Northland, a lot of them, once Christianity starts to have an influence in the north, they are released, and also for other reasons probably for good diplomatic reasons. You want to release your slaves at a good time before your enemies decide, because the enemies are tooling up too, right? Over time they tool up. They get so there's different reasons that are given for why the slaves are released, but we know that they were, and one influence certainly was that Christianity was influential. So they take the message back to their tribes. They often take the scraps of scripture that they have, or single books. There's a famous story about the Gospel of Luke that goes through various hands, ends up in the Carpenter coast, which is down near Wellington. And so, just a couple of quotes here, like, by the time Henry Williams turns up on the Carpenter coast with the first European missionary, which is in 1839, he says, well, Christianity spread by like wildfire here, and with like no Europeans present. So there's all these churches that have popped up, like Māori have built these. They're meeting and they're using what they know of the morning and evening service, the Book of Common Prayer. And he meets one kaumātua. This is the sort of thing that goes on. He meets one kaumātua. He's not literate, like he can't read, but he's memorised the whole of the morning service, already. So that's stuff like this, because of course in oral culture you're attuned. So if you do something repetitively, then these people are going to learn it pretty quick.
It's locked in.
It's going to get locked in pretty quick. So there's all sorts of things. And then on the other side of the island, on the east coast, it's quite a famous story of slaves that are actually delivered back as though from the dead by William Williams, our dictionary man and our translator. They arrive back there. They're sort of welcomed by their people as if, back from the dead. And that sort of kicks off a whole sort of Christian revival on the east coast. So by the time William Williams turns up there as the missionary, he says, well, he's got this amazing line. We which is from the Old Testament, I think. We just had to, we stood still to see the salvation of God. Like, we didn't have to do anything.
You have to do,
because it was just spontaneously, spontaneous combustion.
Yeah.
But it was happening all around us.
Like throughout the country. So it started somewhere, but then it just went off.
And it started and sparked in different places because of these people that took the word back.
Yeah.
Often released slaves. So it's quite a remarkable story, really.
Yeah. That does sound remarkable. And so there's a context to the treaty.
Yeah.
There's a context to why it was written in the first place. So can you talk as much as you want around it?
Yeah.
Why was the Treaty of Waitangi first written? And, who influenced it and anything around that?
Yes. Well, again, there's try and keep this an outline, but there are things going on here. There was the Musket Wars. There was also some depopulation due to European diseases as well, which happened in various parts of the world, which is a really sad and unfortunate phenomenon. But there was issues, like you might say, of crime and law and order. When Europeans were mixing with Māori, they were trading, stuff happened. The proverbial hit the fan. People, there's some crazy stories of what went down. One of the scandals of the 1830s was a leading chief, Te Rongopai, who's quite well known, sort of as a name, not necessarily all the things he did. He contracts a British trading vessel to basically use this ship as a Trojan horse to attack his enemies in the South Island. So he says, "I'll supply you with a boatload of flax if you transport me incognito to the South Island where I can surprise my enemies," and that's what he does. So this is in the 1830s, right before there's any British authority here really to speak of. And so this is a massive scandal that somebody's actually, obviously this ship captain is persona non grata or whatever. They try and bring him to justice, but kind of fail because of the lack of evidence and the fact you're trying to hold a court trial and not on the spot.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to assemble the case, even though I think it was quite obvious what had happened. Anyway, so these issues of law and order, which are coming about through the phrase I like is sort of entanglement. Lives are becoming entangled through trade, often through intimate relationships as well, which are mixed up with the kind of trading thing. And then and another thing that's happening is New Zealand settlement is coming, colonial settlement is coming. It's on the horizon, and that's going to happen whether the authorities will want that to happen or not.
Yeah, so would it be fair to say that early 1830s, there were obviously European settlements, and then there's obviously Maori settlements, and then over time, over that decade, the crossing over just happened naturally, kind of, to the point where...
you've got to remember most of the... So I think the resident European population is often, the figures often quoted as like 2,000 Europeans in 1840. So there's not a very big European population.
I see.
So... And the Māori population is anywhere between 80 to 120,000. So it's not huge, but
comparatively
in comparative terms.
Yeah.
But it's large by comparison with the.
Okay.
But these mostly coastal trading. They're mostly if they're not missionaries, then they're traders of some kind, or and often they've hooked up with a local tribe as well. So that's obviously then leading to issues.
Yeah.
But then what's also happening and what's coming in behind that is, and which is more concerning really, is this push for migration and organised settlement.
Yeah.
So there's people back in the metropolis who are pushing these schemes because they are capitalist schemes, like the New Zealand Company and things. They want to plant colonies and make profit for their investors back home, through land sales and things like that. So that's the New Zealand Company. So and that also back in the UK, there's a humanitarian movement which is concerned about the plight of Indigenous peoples around the globe. And after sort of the anti-slavery movement, they start, raising awareness of other issues that are happening around the place across, particularly the British Empire, but also the European empires. And they say we've got to basically try to control or regulate the situation. So, long story short, British government decides to intervene, and I can talk about who the various players are in that, because that's important too.
Yeah.
But that's all the background that leads us to the treaty, which is basically the British government saying we need to establish an authority on the spot to control lawlessness and to regulate Pākehā settlement. And Māori are also concerned, obviously, about all of those things, including their land. But they're also, I think, concerned about other European empires that might be in the Pacific, and there are the French, the Americans,
licking their chops, looking at this big landmass.
And of course the Brits are concerned about that too, because they're always concerned about the geopolitics of this.
I'm from an area of the world, Nova Scotia, where it was French then English, then French then English.
Well, you know exactly about this, which is kind of like a prequel to New Zealand history, really. So that's all going on, and carries on, right? So, I mean, that's the gist of it, really.
Yeah. So that's kind of what led to it. So let's get to the actual document itself.
Yep.
So I remember when a lot of the political discourse was about the treaty and over the last election that happened. So I'm like, I might as well just read this thing. And then I read both versions, obviously the English translation of the Maori version with the footnotes. That was very helpful. But very early on, I did get that sense that, seems like it's trying to prevent something horrific from happening. At least the preamble before the three, what do you call them? The three
articles.
Three articles. Yeah. And so what did that look like? I heard it was a really rapid document that was kind of put together quickly. And so who was involved in that writing process, translation, and then sending out and people signing it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I'll try and cover all of those. So the instructions for the treaty are drafted back in the UK at the Colonial Office. Yeah. And this links us to the humanitarian movement, because the person doing that is actually a guy called James Stephen. He's a second generation Clapham person. So in other words, his father hung out with William Wilberforce and all the anti-slavery people. And so he's drafting the instructions. He's a lawyer. He's at the Colonial Office. He's drafting the instructions. Captain Hobson is sent out. Basically, it's a race against the clock, because the New Zealand company, I've already talked about, this colonisation company, they jump the gun. They try and get British government authority for what they want to do, and they don't get it initially, and so they just send out the ship. They send out basically a survey ship to buy up land.
It's kind of a classic story. We can't wait for government. Come on, let's just get this thing going.
We're going to do it ourselves anyway. So that kind of really forces the government's hand, as I've alluded to already. So Hobson turns up. New Zealand company's already bought up most of the Wellington region, or purported to anyway. When Hobson turns up in the Bay of Islands, so in Northland, he prepares a treaty. He's assisted by James Busby. He's the British resident who's here. He's meant to have assisted with the law and order situation, but he hasn't been able to do much, because he's a man of war without guns. In other words, he's there he's really a diplomat. He's got no coercive authority. He's got no sort of military backing or anything. So Busby helps. That English draft is given to Henry Williams, who's the resident missionary on the spot, the leader of the CMS mission, and he translates it overnight with his son Edward, who's a 21-year-old, who's more or less grown up in the country, so he's more or less a native speaker since the age of 5 or something. They don't have much time. So the next day, this thing is presented in a hui. So they translate it overnight. It's not the longest document, right?
No, it's not very long.
Yeah, so I mean,
but it would be on a big, massive paper, wouldn't it?
It was written out on parchment, which looks quite impressive when you see the original. Yeah, with all the chiefs. Well, often markings or moko markings, or sometimes signatures below that for those who could sign their name. But anyway, so I guess we should touch briefly on what the treaty says. So it has
Yeah.
the preamble that
Yeah.
you alluded to, that basically says because of incoming British settlement and issues of law and order,
Yeah.
in simple terms, we've decided to act, or the Queen decided to act and send her governor as her representative, and that's essentially what the preamble says. And then the first article says that Māori will assent to or grant to the governor a right of governorship or right of government. Will grant to the Queen a right of government. In the Māori text it says kāwanatanga government. In the English text is sovereignty. We come back to that debate. But essentially that's Article 1. In Article 2, I guess in return the Queen says, I will protect your property rights, would be how the English text read. But if you read the Māori text, it's more, the phrase is tino rangatiratanga, which really connotes this kind of tribal authority and the right to continue exercising your customs and control your lands and so on. So it's got a collective sort of sense to it.
Yeah.
And Article 3 is a right of citizenship.
Yeah.
As in Māori will be British citizens or subjects.
Yeah.
Not citizens. The subjects was the word in those days.
Oh, okay. But they couldn't just go to the UK and be a citizen, or could they?
Well, I suppose, I don't know. It was before the passport system.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. True. That's right. That's right.
But yes, in a sense that, I mean, the wording is will be granted all the rights and privileges of British subjects. So,
Yeah.
I mean, to me that connotes, protection of persons and property.
Yeah.
Life and liberty.
Fair trial, all that stuff.
Fair trial, the sort of Magna Carta type
Yeah.
things. So that's essentially what the treaty says, right? And then it's presented, it's debated a lot. We can come back to, I think you want to know about, is it do Māori, are they keen on it or not? And then missionaries they take 9 sheets around the country.
Okay.
So a lot of people don't realise there's actually 9 treaty sheets.
Yeah.
They all say the same thing, apart from one is an English version, which is an interesting sort of anomaly. But so some chiefs at Port Waikato, about 40, sign an English text version, but the other 8 sheets are Māori text versions that are signed or marked with part of the chief's facial markings, moko, which is, I guess, a sign of the authority that they're ascending to it, which is significant in its own right.
Yeah.
So they are taken around the country by missionaries for the most part. I think in a couple of cases, Navy people. Yeah. But mostly missionaries are doing the interpreting or the translating, and they're advocating to Māori, this is a good thing, this will protect your rights, your land and so on. And that's how it goes down, really.
Yeah. And then so it was not every iwi signed it, but a majority did.
I'd say a majority did, but there are some key chiefs that don't sign, and this sort of connects maybe with the question around how keen were Māori to sign. So the prior question is, no, not everyone signed. Maybe that's partly because a treaty sheet never got there, because it was in the interior and they just didn't get everywhere.
Yeah.
Like mostly they went to coastal locations, right, because we could easily get with boats, essentially. And of course, most tribes did live on the coast, more or less.
Which
I mean,
makes sense.
there were some that didn't, and Waikato. I mean, it did go inland at points, but it certainly didn't arrive everywhere. But the bulk of tribes do sign. There's a couple of areas that are quite interesting that don't, and in those 2 cases, it's a couple of what you call paramount chiefs, like in the centre of the North Island, Tūwhare Toa, paramount chief, and also the Waikato paramount chief, Te Whetawhiro, they don't sign. And Te Hiuhiu's reputed to have said in the traditional kōrero, I will not submit my mana to another person, or in one version, to a woman, as in the Queen. So he clearly knew that there was some. He clearly understood that he was being asked to agree to the exercise of British authority in some way.
Yeah. What I find fascinating is that there's only 2,000 plus Europeans
Yeah.
in New Zealand, and this document's already being circulated across the entire landmass.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of people signed it.
Yes.
And I find that fascinating. So already, were there stories that were being told of like how vast the British Empire was? Like, was it an intimidation thing, or what was going on there?
I think that's part of, basically, it's partly because Māori lives and Pākehā lives in some cases are entangled. I think the population stats don't really reveal the true picture, because there's a lot of, in terms of like permanent population, because there's a lot of trade that's been going on for decades.
I see.
In various parts of the country. And that's, as I say, has led to some quite major incidents. And so there's that. And so Māori have also travelled themselves. So that a lot of chiefs have gone, even from the South Island, they've gone to Sydney, and I guess they've observed and they've gone further afield. They've gone to as far as London in some cases, and they've, I guess, seen the might of the British Empire. Yeah. And so it's partly for Māori, I think it's deciding which horse you're going to go with, like, to put it in a silly way, as in like which empire you're going to do a deal with, and I guess they had the track record through the missionaries, through that relationship with the British. They had a bit of a track record with the French in Northland, which wasn't but a very happy picture. I mean, Captain Cook was not in all places a very happy picture either, but the French, there were some what you probably call massacres up north in the 1700s, around the time that Cook was around, which sort of had lived in Māori memory. And so this idea, and no doubt the missionaries inculcated this view that as well, that the French are not, French Catholic, and these are not people that you especially want to deal with. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, there were these dynamics, right? They were still in play. And you know about French Catholic and British dramas from your part of the world. Yeah. In the northern Americas. So I think it was a lot of chiefs realised they had to pick a side. Yeah. Would be one way to put it. Yeah. And so they did the alliance with the Queen of England, essentially. And also because like one chief gets up, he's in the Waitangi meeting, and he says, "Look, guys, we've come too far. We can't turn back now. Yeah. Like, we're trading with these people. Yeah. In some cases, we've intermarried with them, and if we'd said get lost at the beginning, then maybe we could say get lost now, but we haven't said that." So he says, "Come governor to be," in the English, there's no Māori version of this, but "come governor to be a father, a judge, and a peacemaker." So he clearly understands that the governor is needed to exercise some form of, I guess, law making or law keeping authority in the situation of entangled lives. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So then fast forward. I want to give a little bit of synopsis because I want to get to some more pointed questions. So fast forward, the treaty is not honored. Yep. How it was written. Yep. There's misinterpretations of what that actually meant. Obviously, merchants and different companies just start taking land. Colonization kicks off. Hundreds of thousands of British people come over. Yes. Probably more than anyone anticipated. Yeah, probably at the beginning. And then simultaneously, there's a rapid decline of Maori Christianity at some point as well. Because you just described 60 to 90% at its peak. Yes. But then over the late 1900s or into the early 20th century, there's a big reversal. Can you kind of talk to that a little bit? Yeah, I can. I mean, essentially it's a reflection of what happens post-treaty. Okay. And with the influx of settlement, or organised settlement in a lot of cases, not in Auckland. Auckland was like free-for-all, sort of, partly. Although government was based here very early on, so there was quite a visibility for government in Auckland. So essentially, it takes a while for the real issues to emerge, and it's mostly around land, because obviously settlers want land, and Māori after a while decide. Often Māori actually want settlement because it's going to lead, in their minds, lead to increased trade, they'll have their Pākehā that they can trade with, and can bring the goods of the world to their doorstep, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of goodwill, and a lot of positive relationships are established in the 1840s and 50s. At some point, Māori say, hang on a minute, we don't want to sell any more land. And so this leads to sort of often intra-tribal issues, because some people still want to sell and others don't.
Yeah.
So and that actually leads to deaths and killings and sellers and non-sellers, and the thing is, the settler government's not helping at some point, because they represent the settler population by the late 1850s.
Yeah.
This in some leads to what we know as the New Zealand Wars now, the land wars. Those are kicked off because the government forces through a purchase that it shouldn't have forced through. And there's a lot of criticism back in the UK and on the ground in New Zealand from missionaries and other prominent people saying this is a stupid decision to force this purchase through. But anyway, it kicks off the first Taranaki War, so this is Taranaki and Waitara, and that really just then the situation unravels. That a couple of years later, it's the Waikato Wars. Governor Grey returns. So in sum, there's wars followed by confiscation of land. So that's not likely to put you in a very good state of mind if you're suffering this as Māori, and particularly in sort of the middle of the North Island, in Taranaki, Waikato and Bay of Plenty, where these things happen. And so there's a turning away from the church, or at least there's a turning away from the missionary church, if you know what I mean. So the Anglican, the Wesleyans, Catholics to some extent, experience like a falling off of support, especially in those areas where the war has had an effect, and confiscation. So basically people suffer injustice, and I think Keith Newman calls it a sort of a betrayal. Well, his second book's called Beyond Betrayal.
Yeah.
Because really this government was meant to be a Christian government.
Yeah.
It was sold as such.
Yeah.
It was meant to look after Māori rights. It didn't do so. In fact, it often did the opposite. And so you can see why that would have had a detrimental effect on Māori impressions of Christianity. And yeah, quite a moving, poignant quote really is from the Kapiti missionary Hadfield, who says, some intelligent Māori leaders came to me and said, if this war is carried on, it will have a detrimental impact. They can see this already. It will have a detrimental impact on the faith of the Māori, because either the government is, either Christianity is not true, or the government is not Christian.
Maybe the latter.
And so I know what one I'd pick.
Yeah.
But so they are weighing all of this up, and they're saying, well, you guys are purporting to be the government of a Christian people, but you haven't really acted that way.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people turn to or become caught up in these prophetic movements. There's a rise of sort of Māori prophets, they're called, who essentially combine often biblically inspired ideas and practices with older Māori cosmologies and practices and things. So it all gets very messy in the religious and spiritual landscape of the country from like the 1860s onwards. But there's a lot of Māori who, I guess, remain faithful as well to those more orthodox faiths, like in the Anglican scene, even in the Wesleyan. Then you get people like Ratana, who have an amazing healing ministry. I've just taught on this in my course. He has basically, I mean, these prophets claim to have had angelic visitations, and which have spurred or sparked their calling to stand up against injustice, often to take up arms, but often to be sort of more peaceable as well, pacifist, like Te Whiti at Parihaka. So he's a prominent example that people might, are likely to have heard about Parihaka. So there's a whole range of responses, but really what happens in the New Zealand Wars is not good for Māori Christianity.
No.
And we're still recovering from that.
Yeah.
And in some ways we're still dealing with the legacy we're still dealing with the legacy of colonisation and colonialism vis-a-vis the church and its place in Māori society, Māori communities. Yeah, it's just a reality.
Yeah. And so that's kind of what's happened, broadly speaking. Obviously, you can't brush everything with one stroke. There's variations and particularities in different regions.
Yeah.
What I want to get to now is I did a little bit of homework prior to this interview and conversation, and I looked at some YouTube videos. This is very scholarly of me, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just like, well, what's out there that gets hundreds of thousands of views?
Good market research.
Good market research, exactly. So I came across some news videos on the treaty and origins and what it is now, and then I came across the TVNZ one at the height of the election 2 years ago. And what I noticed was neither of them looked at the Christian origin or missionary origins of the document, or even of European introducing kind of the European world into New Zealand. And my question to you is that important for interpreting the treaty correctly? Not yes or no. What would you say to that?
Well, yes. I mean, I think it is important. I mean, we may have got a treaty of some sort if we didn't have, say, the Christian missionaries on the ground. We may certainly have, got a treaty, but I don't think we would have got the same treaty.
Yeah.
And missionaries translated it, and they said to Māori it's a good thing. So the church is tied up in it. It's inextricable. And the translation, it comes down to the translation itself, because the words that we talked about earlier, like kāwanatanga, governorship, where does that come from? It comes from the Māori translation of the New Testament.
True, yes.
Speaking about Pontius Pilate, people like that, they're obviously kāwana, they're governors. So obviously that example is a good parallel for how Hobson might have been thought about by Māori who had the scriptures, because basically he's the agent of a representative of a distant empire, and he's seeking to basically keep the peace.
Yeah. So what you're saying then is, so the New Testament is translated into Te Rongopai.
Yeah.
And so if someone wanted to know what is that particular word in the Maori version of the treaty, you actually need to go to the New Testament narrative to understand how the context of that word is used. Yeah. Because that's what it would have been based off of. Yes. Was that
in many
correct?
cases, yes.
Okay.
In many cases. So the two key words I think in the treaty are kāwanatanga, which the Crown is given the authority to exercise, government. And then on the other side of the coin is rangatiratanga, chieftainship. Yeah. Rangatira meaning chief. The tanga is the suffix which makes it into a noun, like whatever. Linguists can explain it. But so governorship, the qualities of being a governor, or the qualities or the authority that pertains to being a chief. So that in Article 2 is guaranteed to Māori, right? Yeah. But interestingly, that word rangatiratanga is also used for the kingdom of God. So for the personal rule and reign of God. So in the Lord's Prayer, which probably was one of the first prayers translated, it's may your kingdom come, may your rangatiratanga come. So Māori here are being, guaranteed what you might read through Christian lenses as also a kind of a form of spiritual authority, or at least a word that could be understood with those spiritual connotations as well as the earthly ones. And that's no insignificant thing. So to get back to your question, I think no, we cannot extricate Christianity from the story without making a sort of nonsense of it. Yeah. Yeah, or making it into something that it wasn't.
And so I find that fascinating, that you need the New Testament in one hand, and with the treaty in the other to interpret it correctly. Do you find that's actually happening within kind of contemporary political discourse?
Well, actually, okay, I'll answer that question in a minute. But what you just said there is a really fascinating thing, that phrase, with the New Testament or the Bible in one hand and the treaty in the other. Do you know who's said that before?
Well, John Wesley said something about...
oh, did he?
Oh, never mind, sorry. It's
John Wesley, except he wouldn't have had the treaty.
He would have had the treaty. He would have had something else.
But see, that duo of things,
Yeah.
the Bible on one hand, the treaty on the other, was actually prophesied. Getting back to my Māori prophets narrative, in the 1860s, Apirana Hama Taone, who was a Northland prophetic guy, the missionaries sometimes thought he was crazy, but he was no doubt a person of real status, and he knew his Bible as well. He prophesied that there would come one day a man who would bear in his hands the Bible and the treaty and listen to him. Now, there's actually another prophecy that's almost identical in the 1860s from another Māori prophet, a completely different part of the country. I don't know whether these prophets corresponded, maybe they did, but he says there will come a man. He almost uses the same wording. He actually says from the Whangaehu River, which is in near Whanganui, who will bear in one hand the Bible and the other hand the treaty. And so Ratana is thought to be that person, and actually he has his first vision right at the mouth of the Whangaehu River at Whanganui, where two whales turn up. I mean, this is crazy stories. Two whales turn up, and I think, is it the Archangel Michael or Gabriel speak to him and says, prophesy to the whale, my word shall go to the four ends of the earth or to the four winds. Take my word to the four winds. And then this wave comes in and washes the whale out after he's prophesied that.
I love it. That's awesome.
This is like pretty full on stuff.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So then this starts Ratana's like amazing healing ministry, where basically people drop their crutches and wheelchairs and this is during the influenza epidemic as well when this starts, when he emerges. Anyway, so I just needed to pause on that because you used that phrase. But I think it's quite a significant phrase in New Zealand Christian history.
I think I found the thumbnail for this video.
Yeah, Bible in one hand, treaty in the other.
Yeah.
And of course, that's what the missionaries, in a sense, had done as well, although they didn't intend it. They came with the Bible, and because they were the people on the spot, Empire said, well, can you translate this thing? And they said, okay, well, we will, because we think it's kind of necessary, and we will advocate for it because we think it's kind of necessary to protect Māori rights, fundamentally. Anyway, what was the original question that you asked me?
I'm just still so hung up over that you need the Bible in one hand and the treaty in the other, because people think that there's like a one-for-one word translation when it comes between languages, but that's actually not true. There's no such thing as a one-for-one word, like running in French versus running in English. Even though you might be able to get the sense of what that is through the action, there's a culture behind the word, right? And where do you get the culture? You get the culture from the stories. And so I love how you need the New Testament translation from Te Reo Māori because there's stories that capture the essence of what we're trying to convey here. Yes. Which I think is beautiful. Like as a biblical studies person, I absolutely love that. Yeah,
exactly.
Because I think one of the things that you talk a lot about, at least in my conversations with you, is we need context. Proper historical context to interpret these documents, these founding documents of the country. So let's pause there for a second.
Yeah.
What's behind us? What's this?
Okay, so we're jumping back into the 1830s now.
Let's just quickly go and then we'll come back forward again.
Yeah, so we'll come back and we'll answer this treaty question.
Yeah.
What are we missing about our treaty discourse?
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is part of the chronology, right? This is the first New Zealand flag, 1834, designed by a missionary, again, because it's got the cross of St. George, right?
Yeah.
And then these other stars in the corner. And I actually forget off the top of my head what the symbolism of those stars are. But a flag like this was actually flown from missionary vessels at the time. Chiefs actually voted on, they had three flags to choose from, and they voted for this one by narrow margin. So it's probably the first sort of democratically conducted process, but aristocratically conducted democratic process. They voted for this. So in simple terms, this allowed Māori or New Zealand-based vessels to trade without getting arrested in port for not flying a recognised national flag. That's essentially what this flag was. This flag becomes the flag of the United Tribes, of the Northern Tribes, which then feeds into the Declaration of Independence a year later, where James Busby's this British president, he's trying to coordinate basically a pan-tribal authority that can deal with law and order issues between the races and things. and so they declare this thing which says we will meet annually in a parliament to make laws for the regulation of trade, the solving of crime issues and things like this. But it never has time to get going. So that's 1835.
Yeah.
The treaty's 1840. There's not enough time to bring about this pan-tribal thing because we're just emerging from the Musket Wars and tribes don't see eye to eye.
Yeah.
Even in the same region, they don't see eye to eye. So to get tribes together in a sort of pan-tribal thing to make law, which is kind of a European concept, really, that's not going to happen overnight. And it doesn't happen. And so then we can get the treaty. History sort of winds up pretty quickly, and there's just not time to coordinate this thing. Yeah.
But so for those watching, Sam was like, can I hang a flag up behind us? I'm like, yeah, let's hang a flag up. He's like, I hope it's not too controversial. I'm like, I don't care.
Well, because people may see this flag right around the place and not understand what it is.
Yeah.
So it's actually a flag to allow New Zealand-based vessels to trade.
Yeah.
And if you actually look at the flags of the world, certainly in the British Empire, a lot of them are sort of navy flags or navy-based or the mercantile flags. In fact, the New Zealand flag, I was doing some research on this the other day, was a British trading vessel flag, which also had some Royal Navy sort of association as well.
Oh, okay.
But as in the current New Zealand flag, it was adopted from the blue ensign, which was a British merchant flag essentially.
I find that so cool. It's hard for us in the 21st century to kind of get back into the 1800s.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you see a ship coming from a distance, you're probably thinking, is it friend or foe?
Yeah, is it friend or foe?
Yeah. And so that flag signaled, no, we're here to trade.
Yeah, exactly. And like I think I said to you before we started, like still at this time, the British Navy was policing the high seas on the Atlantic and taking slaving vessels captive and things. They were the police. They were the high seas police at the time. So that was another reason too. You wanted to kind of pretty clearly declare yourself, so you didn't get boarded and like taken a prize or something. Yeah, which still might not prevent it.
No,
if you had pirates operating, but.
All right, so I want to talk about that briefly.
We're going off.
Because some people, they say, no, this is like the first treaty. This is actually supersedes the Treaty of Waitangi. Yeah,
I think there's a narrative that's emerged, and I think it's in more recent years, but I could be wrong, that the Declaration of Independence, 1835, is kind of the parent document to the treaty, and it should be seen as kind of taking precedence or something.
Yeah.
But I think that kind of inverts, well, it doesn't invert the chronology, but I think it's pretty clear that the treaty was seen as the significant document, through the 19th century, even by Māori. So
yeah, okay, that's good to know. So in 2025, everything's heated up, and we'll kind of end with these next two questions. Yeah. Do you think, the treaty's misinterpreted in 2025? Because there's obviously different interpretations depending on the political party that is vying in Parliament right now.
Yeah.
And I'm not necessarily asking for your interpretation. I'm just saying, do you think it's the discourse is kind of unhelpful at the moment because there's so many different interpretations that are going on?
Well, there's been a lot of politics obviously around the treaty principles, which hasn't helped. In some ways it's maybe helped in that it's sort of got the treaty prominent part of the discourse again, so it's maybe in a public education exercise opportunity. But I think we've potentially gone down one or two unhelpful avenues with our treaty discourse, and one is that and it's really a sign of the times, the discourse around sovereignty. Did Māori cede sovereignty or didn't they? And the tribunal in actually the Northland Inquiry, not in any other inquiry, but in the Northland Inquiry said Māori or Ngāpuhi, the Northern tribes, did not cede their sovereignty when they signed the treaty. Now, that's become like a sort of a catch cry in some quarters. And in some ways, I think that kind of, to get overly focused on the word sovereignty, I think kind of misses all of the stuff that's been going on the page actually in the Māori text. So I think, and actually in the context, so text and context, right? My main message here is we need to get back to the Māori text, which we've been talking about, which uses kawanatanga, which uses rangatiratanga. So you have, in a sense, I could reframe it and say there are actually two sovereignties going on here, which need to be read somehow in tandem or are not inconsistent with each other. So you have government, which is like a European version of sovereignty, because that's what states exercise, right? Is government. And you have a Māori version of sovereignty, which is tribal or hapu or iwi based rangatiratanga. Now, what I say and what other scholars have said, and just, well, not just in the last few years, is that you can actually read these authorities together so that they're not necessarily inconsistent, and in fact they can work together. So Kāwanatanga will ensure, a legal framework at a national level, but will allow tribal or local forms of authority to carry on local custom, obviously local control of land and so on, and property. So I think that's the essence of the treaty, and I still think that in 1840, and I still think that essence is important now, even though times have changed and our context is like radically different from 1840. And we can't go back to 1840, and I don't think nobody wants to go back to 1840, even if it was possible, because we now have a democratically elected parliament that effectively represents the sovereign voice of the nation. But that doesn't mean that we can't represent, or we can't represent within that a strong sort of rangatiratanga voice, and also at the local level that we can't give maximum authority within the general sort of framework of national law to a Māori or a treaty voice, or what I say is an Article 2 voice, tino rangatiratanga voice. Because I think, if we're concerned about honouring the treaty, and I think we should be, then we need to, I think, still honour that tribal based authority that the treaty recognises, alongside this grant of authority to the British Crown, which in a sense, I mean, we now say the Crown and right of New Zealand. So the Crown has really become the government, the New Zealand government. Yeah. For all practical, constitutional purposes. Even though we've got a Governor General who represents His Majesty. Not Her Majesty anymore. So.
Well, I think this has been excellent. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I learned a lot more than I knew I was going to learn a lot, but I've got a few big takeaways, like that Bible on one hand, treaty on the other. That's just like, that completely reframes how I look at this, which is really helpful.
Yes, both at an interpretive level in terms of understanding the treaty itself, like text and context, but also with those prophetic movements, which I guess bring some Christian hope back to Māori, even though the churches at the time, and this is something we should acknowledge, didn't always see eye to eye, obviously, because they seemed unorthodox in some features. Although Ratana, the man with the Bible in one hand and the treaty in the other, was pretty orthodox, except that he gave a lot of emphasis to angelic operations, which you can understand. Because he claimed to have had angelic visitations. There you go.
So you've got some, I don't know if you can speak to these yet, but you've been writing a little bit. So what can people look forward to over the next year that you hope will be coming out, whether published or videos? Or,
sure.
So what's going on?
Well, there's my personal research site, nzhistorian.com. It's I got quite a good URL there. nzhistorian.com. So that's got a link to my latest article on the treaty interpretation issue, actually, where I talk about reconciling the texts. So I think that that's got quite a bit of notice already out there. So hope maybe some pushback at some point. People who don't agree that you can reconcile the text, but that's what I'm arguing, the English and Māori text. And also, hopefully, God willing, I've got a biography of Henry Williams, who was the treaty translator on the spot. But and he's significant in that sense, but I think he's more, or equally or more significant as a missionary figure. So that's hopefully coming out and going to be published in the next 6 to 12 months, hopefully.
Phenomenal. Thanks so much, Sam.
Kia ora. Enjoy the conversation.